PTG Podcast, Episode 4. Welcome to the PTG Podcast. My name is Paul Grossclose, also known as PTG, and this is the podcast for young filmmakers like myself. In these episodes, I will cover everything you need to know to create great films and content for YouTube from your bedroom. In this episode of the PTG Podcast, I will be answering the age-old question: how much RAM do you really need to edit great videos? Enjoy. Hey guys, welcome back to the PTG Podcast. My name is Paul Grossclose, as I introduced myself in the intro of this podcast, and this podcast is all about RAM. How much RAM do you need? What is RAM? And that's how I'm going to start this podcast off with: what is RAM? What the heck is RAM? Video editors talk all about it. You need RAM to make your computer faster. Is that really true? Is that all? I'm going to cover everything you need to know about RAM and how much RAM you need in this episode. So I really hope this will help you guys out, and I've done a lot of research on this myself, upgrading RAM multiple times. So let's start off with: what is RAM? RAM is a acronym for random access memory, and there are two types of RAM. There is RAM and VRAM. Video RAM, that's what VRAM is, and RAM, which is just random access memory, and video RAM is video random access memory. It's the same exact thing, it's just with the V in front for video. So basically what RAM is, normal RAM, is random access memory, obviously, but for instance, Pages or Microsoft Word, when you're typing a document, that text, before it's saved on your desktop, is all being saved in your RAM. It's all cache. It's all being saved up for your computer to use. It's random access memory, and when that gets filled up, it'll put it on your hard drive, and that makes it slower. So the more RAM you have, the more memory and more applications and more stuff you can have open and running at the same time without having any significant slowed performance. It's just cache that your computer can access and get to make your processes that you do daily a lot easier and faster. Now, video RAM is a lot like RAM, obviously, but it is just for video and pixels. There's graphics cards will have integrated or dedicated RAM. So a lot of times laptops will have integrated, but on my iMac, I have 2 gigabytes of dedicated VRAM, and that helps me edit videos faster. The more RAM you have, obviously, the better, but you also have to put into perspective your budget. Now, there are also different types of RAM. In my iMac, I use a RAM that's DDR3, and there's like DDR2 and DDR4, and there's a whole bunch of different types of RAM, and that's just how big it is, how many memory slots are on it. You'll have to figure that out in the configurations of your personal machine. So all our machines are not going to be alike. So while deciding how much RAM you're going to need, you're going to also have to put into perspective what editing software you are going to be using. Now, if you're on a Mac, you might be using Final Cut Pro or Premiere Pro and the Adobe Suite. I like to use both. I love both of those software equally the same. I honestly cannot pick a favorite, but Final Cut is also made by Apple. So with the Macs, the integrated memory, they work together, so it's amazing. So you don't need crazy amounts of RAM to pull off Final Cut Pro, a professional software. You don't need crazy types of RAM. So you're gonna have to put that into perspective. So with Final Cut, when you may need 8 gigabytes of RAM for Final Cut, you're probably gonna need 16 gigabytes for Premiere, because Premiere, it hogs your memory like crazy, and it doesn't have background rendering, so it's a slower experience, but it's a better software, but a slower experience, which is why I like Final Cut for some things and Premiere for other things. But you're gonna have to put that into perspective. And so let me explain to you the 3 different types of RAM selections that I would recommend you guys getting for your different price ranges. So for 1080p HD video, I would recommend the minimum RAM that you get for your computer is 8 gigabytes, and that's stretching it. You probably should at least get 16, but let's just say 8 gigabytes because it's doable on Macs with Final Cut Pro. So 8 gigabytes is your minimum. Good video editing, you're really gonna want 16 gigabytes. That's really your sweet spot. It's enough, but it's not too much. I think 16 right now is the sweet spot, but 32 is gonna become the sweet spot in a few years. I really do believe. So I think the best case scenario for 1080p video is 32 gigabytes. 4K video, it's a lot bigger. So the minimum, I think you should have 16 gigabytes, especially if you're doing in Premiere. For a good scenario, I would use 32 gigabytes, and for your best scenario, 64 gigabytes. And I think 64 is very excessive right now. You don't need it right now. Right now, the softwares can't even fill up 64 gigabytes of RAM. And so I just got a text there. Basically, you're really gonna want at least 16 gigabytes of RAM to be creating great videos and content. But honestly, right now, I would use 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes. I've used 16 gigabytes for years, and I just recently updated to 32 gigabytes, and it is amazing. So that's kind of just what I want to say. There's a lot of misconceptions that are like, you need more RAM to make your computer faster. No, it's just more memory for the computer to use when doing all these different tasks. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this episode and this podcast. If you guys like it, if you want to read the article for this podcast, go to www.paulgrossclose.com/podcast004. Thank you guys so much for listening. I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace, guys. See ya.